Morning, colleagues. How are you this morning? I'm not going to waste time, people, because I don't think you want to listen to my voice. You came to see the guy that is going to inform us about risk in Africa and in South Africa, so I don't want to put the focus on me, but rather on Iraj, a very good friend of the business school. I'm actually privileged to call Iraj my friend. Iraj, I will immediately go on to your very long CV here. I tried to, reduce the number of words here, but it was a struggle. In any case, let me introduce you to the audience here today. Iraj is a founder and chief executive of the Pan-African Capital Holdings Limited. He's the CEO of Pan-African Capital Holdings. He was a professor in economics at UCT before entering the business sector in 2000. He obtained his BA degree and MA in economics at UCT and a PhD in economics from Simon Fraser University in Canada. His involvement in policy documents in South Africa includes the following: the Transformation and Development Bank of South Africa in 1995, the RDP White Paper in 1995, the Growth Gear, as we know, in 1996, the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, 1997 and 1998, the Presidential Review Commission, 1997 and 1998, and he was a member of the President's Economic Advisory Panel, 2006 to 2009, and also economic advisor to the Minister of Mineral Resources from 2010 to 2012. He's a prolific writer, author of books and articles in journals such as The Economic Growth in South Africa 1992, Transformation in Action, Budgeting for Health Service Delivery in 1998, Economics of Tobacco Control, Optimal Policy Mix, 1998, and Economic Globalization and Fiscal Policy in 1998. So during December 1999, Iraj was based at the IMF, where Washington, working on issues such as fiscal vulnerability assessment. He joined Standard Bank as the Group Chief Executive, and he serves as an ESCO member of Standard Bank Group. He was a columnist at Soweto as an economist, and in 2003, the Association of Black Securities and Investment Professionals awarded him the title as Top Economist of the Year. In 2013, he joined us as a business school as honorary professor, visiting professor. So we are very pleased to call Iraj our honorary professor. And he serves on many boards of companies such as Fortress Income Fund Limited, African Maritime Solutions, Into Fruits Pty Limited, Munich Ray of Africa, and Auditor General of South Africa. So people, I'm very pleased and honored to introduce Iraj to you. I hope I did justice to the guy. He's a master teacher, so I don't want to waste time, Iraj. Thank you very much for coming up, Iraj, and address us. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to be back here. And I'm just testing my, I think it's on. I appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to be here. I've put within the time limit that I sort of had, sort of 5 areas that I like to cover as fast as I can, and then leave time for Q&A, as they say, which is actually the juicy part of any presentation. To begin with, and I'm going to go quickly because a lot of these are these days self-evident. We don't have to be a specialist anymore to know that the system that we have around us, something is not right. Now, economists have got their own take on it, political scientists have their own spin on it, system analysts, they explain it from a different point of view, and every profession that you have, they have their own technical perspective on what is happening to the system. And by system, I mean the entirety of our civilization. Whether you're interested on the environmental side of it, social side of it, political side of it, economic side of it, financial side of it, technological side of it. These are all, in my language, or in my understanding, there are subsystems of an entire system within which we operate, within which as human beings we give meaning to our own life, and in a way shape our own psychological, intellectual, and physical existence. So that's what I mean by system. What is quite clear is that wherever we are, whether you're on a small island, on China or the United States, the weakest or the strongest, one thing that we cannot avoid nowadays is to say something is not right. And quite frankly, the system technically has got two major symptoms. I'll come back to share with you my understanding of some of the problems, but let's deal with the symptoms that we can agree much easier than on the causes. The symptoms that we have in each of these systems: A, the system is unstable. Look at the politics around us, look at the financial side, look at the currency markets, look at the education system, and so on and so forth. So instability is one symptom that we see. And once again, it doesn't matter where you are, you experience it. The second attribute or feature of the system as we experience it is volatility. You just don't know why suddenly this happens. Right? The UK doesn't know how did it happen. We are not accusing them, they say it. We are not judging them. President Obama yesterday was saying Americans are not confused as to suddenly why they have Trump. But it is good or bad for them, it's their business. In South Africa, we have our own problems, so we don't have to go far. If you're in Europe, Europeans have got their own problems. And so it goes. What is happening at the moment is there is a trend in terms of socio-cultural polarization, which seems to be the macro indicator of these systemic problems that we have. Once upon a time, in our lifetime, those who are my age, they would remember that the world was fairly simple. There was the East and the West, they were fighting, the communists and the capitalists. So you know who the enemy is, right? These days, who is the enemy? You go to France, it's the French who are fighting. Or you go to America, you go to Russia, and so on and so forth. So in the old days, we knew how to deal with the old problems. You had the enemy, you let the tanks get to the border and you shoot the hell out of them, and the enemy gets wiped out, or you get wiped out, or mutually wiped out. If the tanks didn't work out, you fly the planes, and if the planes don't work out, you use the missiles. The solutions were fairly known, because the enemy was known. I submit that nowadays we have a polarization which is within the society. And quite frankly, if we go a little bit deeper and if we are honest with ourselves, some of that polarization is in each one of us. Right? Sometimes you look in the mirror and say, well, I'm actually racist. I'm actually capitalist. I'm socialist. It's an element in it, huh? And we don't want to admit it, of course, when it's a public arena, we put up the masks and we are what's politically correct. But that's what the countries do too. That's what the political parties do too. But as a system, therefore, we have a polarization which is very problematic, and I'll come back to that. In this context, the economy operates within a context of a systemic operations. Be it politics, be it sociology, be it human beings, economics is about people. Economics is run by the people, it's about the people, it uses the people in many different ways. Intellectually, manually, emotionally, every other way. Therefore, to the extent that the system within which the economies have to operate, to a large extent, they reflect those systemic instability and volatility. So it's not surprising that we see the European economy, the EU economy, or the British economy, or the Chinese economy, or the American economy, they have these unstable dimensions to them. And the more they try to fix it, the less they succeed. There are major structural imbalances within the society. The most important one that is now become endemic is the maldistribution of income. The so-called 1%, 99% movement. The youth unemployment and unemployability is another issue. Once upon a time, it was something that if you are in the sort of less developed countries, you had that problem. Unemployment was high. But today, unemployment amongst the youth in Europe, in some of the key economies like France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and UK, is reaching double digits, some of them in the 20s, some of them in the 30s. That's a problem. And there's a phenomenon now that the older generations who sort now they retire and it's their sort of golden age and they can relax and depend on the society and or on their children to support them, they end up doing exactly the reverse. The children in their 30s are coming back to the parents to get support. Something is not working. So these are disruptive undercurrents. They reflect a particular systemic problem, and they're not going to allow the system to settle down. Oops, what did I push? Something wrong. Okay. Within the African economies, I'm summarizing my pictures first, if you're wondering where I'm going with this, so that if I run out, at least I've got my messages to you first. African economies, Africa is a vast country, the largest continent. Therefore, when we talk about Africa, and I made this point last year, and every time we have to remind ourselves that we mustn't fool ourselves that Africa is a homogeneous, single country like New Zealand. It's not. We're talking about a variety, possibly the most heterogeneous in terms of culture, language, geography, politics, history, etc., etc. So we must be very, very realistic and scientific when we talk about Africa, that whatever statement we make about the state of politics or economics or finance or whatever, Africa is not a small place. So we must be very, very careful. So in that context, to the extent that some of African economies, such as South Africa, such as Nigeria, such as Ghana, Angola, and so on and so forth, they have been and remain to a large extent dependent on commodities, and commodity prices have stabilized, their economies have a better chance in that regard. We were hammered over the past few years, and I'll show some pictures as well. For example, a country like Nigeria or Angola that was in surplus. In every respect, balance of payment surplus, fiscally they had a lot of money. Suddenly the oil price collapses, continues for 5-6 years. Now they got fiscal deficits, and the gap between fiscal deficit and social instability is very narrow. Because when 90-80% of your government revenue comes from one single commodity called oil, and oil price goes under, well, your fiscal revenue disappears. How do you cover wages, salaries, health, roads, etc., etc. So commodity prices have been very problematic over the past few years for many African economies, some of the major ones. And of course, the ones who were not dependent on commodities, actually they're not doing that badly either, because they didn't worry about commodities. And for them, the fact that oil price was down and they were oil importers, it was good for them. They diversified their economies. A country like Ethiopia is doing relatively well. Morocco is doing well. So Tanzania is doing well. These are economies that were not that dependent on commodities. The South African economy, so I started from the global economy, the continent, to like a funnel home. Well, you all know, we've got a structure, we've inherited structural problems, and we've then compounded it with our own problems that we don't know how to get out of it at the moment. We are in the middle of it. Your guess is as good as mine as to how this is going to evolve over the next 2 years. The fact of the matter is we've pretty much neglected the economy. And not neglected in a neutral way. We've not only failed to deal with the structural issues, we've compounded it, and with every step of the political nature, we've made the economy even more bogged down in uncertainty, in abuse of resources, misallocation of resources, and so on and so forth. So now we have a situation that both the poor, the rich, and the middle class are suffering for different reasons. And that is not a comfortable situation from a socio-psychological point of view. And we all feel it if we are honest with ourselves. And in the process, of course, we all, because we have that split personality, we're looking for enemy, looking for somebody to blame. The whites blame the blacks blame the whites, the capitalists blame the socialists, the communists want for excuses amongst the capitalists, and the game continues. And by the way, this is the old paradigm. We have new problems. It was Einstein who said we cannot solve the problems that we have with the same mindset that we created. And if you think deeply, you see that Trump wants to solve the problem that he faces, or America faces, with the same mindset that created it. Us in South Africa, we're doing the same thing, the Brits are doing the same thing, and so on and so forth. So it's a very important insight that I believe as a student of social science, you need to think about at a personal level, as well as at the societal level. In terms of downgrades that we've had, both S&P and Fitch, and we're waiting for Moody's, it has added uncertainty. At the moment, we have a split rating, and in the next 6 weeks or so, we'll see which way it will go. We have not yet fully, from a macroeconomic and financial point of view, seen the full impact of our downgrade below investment grade. If Moody's also joins the other two rating agencies, and then we have a non-split rating, then you'll see the full impact. So it is a national responsibility by business, by government, and the rest of us, labor, analysts, to avoid a further downgrade. It gives nobody any benefit and should give nobody any joy that the country gets downgraded just because we want the new minister to learn, or we want President Zuma to learn what it means. That's cutting your nose to spite your face. It's not rational, that doesn't make sense. In terms of downgrade risk, downside risk that we have in this environment, we have extreme policy uncertainty. And policy uncertainty goes really like multi-layers. It's a complex process. For media or for soundbite on TV, you talk about policy uncertainty, but policy uncertainty in terms of investment, in terms of economic policy, short-term, medium, and long-term, it's got many, many layers. At one layer, we don't know, as a nation, as investors, as a students, you don't know which way resource allocation is going to go. Remember, economy and society is not an ad hoc thing, it's a system. If you ask our cabinet, what's your 5-year or 10-year or 15-year or 20-year strategy, 6 ministers will give you 12 different answers, depending who they talk to and what time you catch them. Yeah. They don't. Our industrial policy is not clear, our education policy is not clear, our third or tertiary education, which is an important part of modern economy in terms of skills and expertise, is not clear, and so on and so forth. Because the cabinet, the ministers, and the political parties, all of them, are busy with other sensational issues. They've neglected the economy. Because other issues are so much more exciting. These things are boring. They need hard work. They need a lot of midnight sort of burning of the candle, right? But it's so easy to go and get a headline, cut a ribbon, make a noise, attack somebody, be on TV. Somebody claps for you, somebody attacks you. All of them are exciting. For politicians, that's the game. It's like actors. They like be on the stage. In the meantime, this is policy uncertainty. I invite you, and here, and for my sins, I'm in the open discussion. I ask any minister, any president, deputy president, any subcommittee of the cabinet to tell us what is the strategy in their area. I won't even ask them how much have you coordinated with your colleagues next week. Because that's the next layer of policy clarity. Not only we should have an industrial policy, but that industrial policy should be coordinated with our logistics, with our security, with our IT, with our agriculture, with our telecommunication. Do I make sense? But that's what policy certainty means. Policy cannot be in a vacuum. You can't have a minister writing a piece as if it's an academic piece. We are an institution of learning. Academics are good at that, and they should focus on theirs. They publish the paper, when they publish, they're on their CV, game finished. Our ministers act exactly the same. They think they just have to publish papers without follow-up, without consequences, without monitoring, without putting capacity in place to give that policy operational substance. So policy uncertainty is there, and of course that policy uncertainty is systemic. It's not just in South Africa, it's also in Europe. It's also in our trading partners' destinations. If we sit across today with one of our key trading partners, UK, and say, well, can we rethink now that you are Brexiting, can we rethink our trade policy? They say, well, we're waiting for EU to give us a thing before we can talk to you. That's a 5 to 10 year project. What do we do? So we have internal policy uncertainty and we have external policy uncertainty. That said, the global expectations of growth is that from a low base, we're likely to pick up, with the exception of South Africa. South Africa at the moment, because of that split rating, we don't know which way it will go. If Moody's also downgrades us, you can rest assured, this is where economists can be one-handed, not double-handed, you can rest assured that the economy would have to go to a recession. The question is how deep or how shallow that recession will be. If we are deep like Brazil, 5 years later, you go to -3, and then from -3%, you sort of claw your way up. You may not go -3 if we are lucky that the commodity prices hold. But if you're downgraded and the commodity prices also go to another wobbly, then we too could end up with what is called a deep recession. Brazil and Russia have taken 5 to 6 years to get out of it. How long will we take to it? And take us to get out of it? It would depend on how focused our politicians become after. If they remain shambolic as they are now, the economy will suffer more. So we are in that space, but the rest of the continent, from a low base, is growing and is expected to grow relatively mildly. The days of super cycle of growth have gone. Of course, that said, on the continent there are countries like, as I mentioned before, Ethiopia and so on, that are growing at 5 to 7%. So that's also part of the continent. Our prospects, as you know, is at the moment bogged down by our own politics. Nothing else. We are, in a way, in the language of soccer, doing our own goals on a daily basis. And that's adding to the uncertainty. And the final message is that fundamentally, what has been up to now a very positive and constructive part of our political economy, namely the dominance of the ANC, it has become the Achilles heel of the economy. It was extremely helpful in the first 15 years of new dispensation to have a party that was assured of its political base, had ideological consistency, had political unity, and it was leading the important breakthroughs that South Africa had to do from 1994 to 2000, 2005, 6, thereabout. None of the emerging economies, or in fact emerged economies, developed economies, had managed to achieve what we achieved in that short space of time. And that had to do with the fact that the ANC was dominant, was consistent, was committed to serving the national interest. To the extent that ANC over the past few years has become more and more splintered, confused, infighting, that translates into the neglect of the economy, the neglect of investment, and so on and so forth. So that's exactly where we are at the moment, and we need to see how this will play itself out. So the loss of national certainty, national confidence, if you prefer, on the part of the investment community on the one hand, on the part of the poor and disadvantaged on the other, both of them have lost confidence in the capacity and the capability and the motive and intentions of the government and the machinery of the state. So at one extreme you see the poor daily in the street, literally putting their lives on the line, so to speak, literally, in protest, in political contestation for limited resources. They've been neglected under apartheid, now they've been neglected under the new dispensation. And it is not that resources are not there. They know it, I know it, you know it. The fact is that the resources are abused and misused. And the poor know it. Now, that's one extreme. The other extreme, the investment community, the business community, for the uncertainties that I mentioned, whether those uncertainties are global or a mix of local and global, they don't know which way the policy framework is going to go, and therefore, when in doubt, they sit it out, because there is much else they can do. In between, you have the students who are up in arms, quite correctly so, because they too have been neglected. You cannot have in the 21st century an economy that is still producing skills at the level, at the rate, as if digital technology hasn't happened. It's no longer about now, it's about their future. So understandably, they are now. So, this is the context of our political economy. The question is, what are some of the key structural issues? I'm going to go quick because of time. The first and foremost and universally sort of observable is lack of ethical conduct in terms of leaders. Corruption once upon a time was the prerogative or characteristics of the less developed countries. Today, show me one country that is not corrupt. Show me one leader, maybe there's only one. At least there is no evidence yet in Singapore that there's corruption. Everywhere else there is. And that leadership that I'm using, it is not just political leadership, corporate leadership, organizational leadership, church or religious organizations, media. That's a systemic issue. Income inequality, these are the symptoms of that systemic instability, volatility that I shared with you. Income inequality has reached literally unsustainable high levels. You have technological disruption, and it's not going to stop. It has only just begun in terms of its impact on the economy, on the means, not on the means, on the process of production, on the labor coefficient, for those of you who are doing economics. The labor coefficient of production has dropped dramatically in every sphere. And it's not going to change anymore. And that, of course, creates a disconnect between the economy out there, what we teach at the universities, and the policies that so-called political leaders are thinking about. For example, our Minister of ICT, technology, has taken 11 years to decide on what policy we should have. 11 years, right? Half a generation. Students are paying the price for it. Businesses are paying the price for it. The minister is still thinking about it. Completely oblivious. But that technological disruption is changing the nature of the economy in dramatic, fundamental ways. And it's not going to stop. Very importantly, the rising indebtedness in the global economy. If you recall, back in August of 2008, what caused the great disruption in the financial market, or called the Great Recession, was caused by the over-indebtedness of the corporates and the banks in the United States primarily and Europe, and sort of spread globally, caused the 2009 and up to today's economic contraction, instability, and so on and so forth. At the moment, the level of global indebtedness is more than what it was in, let's call it September, August or July of 2008, prior to that disruption. So you would have thought we learned the lessons of indebtedness? Not at all. The only difference between now and then is that then governments were not largely over-indebted. In other words, they had headroom. They could borrow. UK could rescue a bank in UK, and they did. The United States could rescue General Motors and 100-odd banks. Germany could rescue a few banks. But today, those governments are out of borrowing headroom. They too are over-indebted. Back home here, 45% of our lower and middle income households on a monthly basis have to borrow to survive. So over-indebtedness in the global economy is not a theoretical, non-binding phenomenon. In every society that you go, the lower middle income people are over-indebted for survival. And that is very, very unsettling. If if you're in it. And when you're unsettled, you show it in the society, you show it in a political way, you show it in an economic way. How do you expect me to be calm and productive when I come to work, where I know that in 3 days' time, unless I can borrow to do ABC, my children are hungry, I may be kicked out of my apartment. So there is a very real side to this notion that economists use, over-indebtedness. I mean, there are a lot of symptoms in the global system, but I just thought, for me, these are the top 4 problematic ones. I want to quickly say, well, what are some of the causes? Sociologists, philosophers, and others all differ as to what it is, and they should differ because we really don't have a full scientific basis. But for me, if I was going to say what are some of the big causes from purely economic point of view, the near universal application of individualism is one of the causal factors in those systemic instability, volatility that I shared with you. The spread of materialism, everything is measured by money and how much you made it. Doesn't matter what type of person you are, as long as you have money and you can flash it and you can do it, then you've made it. That's the notion of human success at the moment. It used to be once upon a time in the West, but now Chinese are more individualistic, more materialistic, more capitalistic than anybody ever was in the West. And nationalism is another disease that was once upon a time cause of many wars, First World War, Second World War. It's becoming now part of a section of modern society, not everybody. But the societies are split. UK is exactly split in the middle between nationalism and integration, between partition and integration. United States is a split. South Africa has got its own nationalist. Every society, every island you go, they want to take charge again. They want to solve the problems of 21st century with the solutions of 19th and 20th century. They refuse to accept that the system has changed. So nationalism is one of the drivers, and it's just the beginning of the resurgence of it. We have to see how it pans out. And finally, the pandemic prevalence of prejudices. And prejudice is not just racial, it's not just against women, not against children, not against the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians and the Buddhists and the Hindus and the atheists and everything else. It's just everywhere. To think that in 21st century, at the age that we are, there is an estimated, United Nations figure, estimated 170 to 210 million slaves in the world. You would have thought our consciousness has evolved way beyond that. That human beings can slave others. And for a change, the majority of these slaves are not black, for a change. So the issue is not just racial prejudice. If you look at the number of women that are suppressed or prejudiced, never mind from a pay point of view, and this is the fancy part of it. The crude part of it is, as we speak in 21st century, in India and part of Southeast Asia, women, baby girls are buried alive. 21st century. And how women are treated in the Middle East. So we are not talking about small number of people who've been affected by this notion of prejudice. Then if you unpack it, it's like a massive onion that you unpack it, you cry. Prejudice is like that. It's embedded in the system. And it cuts across all kinds. The way workers are treated, the way women are treated, the way children are treated, the way minorities are treated, the way every otherness is treated. We have otherized in the past out of ignorance and superiority. Today we're doing it systemically in the name of nationalism, in the name of profit, in the name of some or other misguided prejudice. I don't have time to do more of that. Let me stop there. That can get very exciting. In terms of this environment that I mentioned indebtedness is a major issue. This is the level of indebtedness. This was in 2007 when the crisis happened around here, August of 2008, and look what has happened, whether you exclude United States and China or whether you sort of do a weighted average. However you analyze it, the level of indebtedness is rising. That's, in the language of finance, is like a time bomb. When it will explode, what it will cause it, I have no idea. But I invite you to be very, very alert to that. Technology is disrupting 100 odd years ago. When you floated a company, it would last up to 100 odd years. There's one or two of them still around, like GE and so on, right? But these days, look at the lifespan of a listed entity. It's caused by technology. It's a sudden death. If your business was typewriter somewhere here, forget it. Now, there are so many businesses that are doing so wonderfully now, and I can tell you in 5 years' time, they'll be gone. And there are so many businesses that we haven't heard of. Facebook, what was that? Twitter. Naspers. Huh? Are you with me? So technology is at work 24/7, 365, and is disrupting big time. Look at the way businesses, commerce is affected. This on the left, you have here the volume in terms of dollar. B2C is business to customer. Look at the rate of volume of trade. And this is again the same in terms of number of transactions. Now this might sound like a nice graph that's going up, and we always as human beings like everything that goes up. But the flip side of it is this. When business happens like this with this technology, the tax base of the country changes. Because these guys who are doing these things or selling these items, they are sitting on some tax haven in some oceanic existence looking out of the window. But we're buying it, and it's comfortable to sit in an office and order, and it comes to you, but the taxman doesn't get the tax. But our poor need the money, and the students say fees must fall, and where the money comes from, but you just ordered something that the tax went somewhere else. And you don't see yourself as being part of that problem. But you are. Do I make sense? And there's nothing you can do in it. I'm part of it, you're part of it, we're all part of it. I don't have time. We can spend a whole day to unpack not just the tax implication, I'll give you the obvious one, the employment opportunities. Right? The skill dislocation. All of it changes. Whereas before, in the past, it was very predictable. You knew exactly who is going to be employed in what sectors, and there were some. I was one of them. In my younger days, we would predict 30 years of number of jobs that will come in agriculture, in mining, in this and that. You would plan a skill profiling and all that stuff. Very exciting. And relatively reliable. Today, you must be out of your mind if you think that you must spend your time on that stuff. The game has moved. Because you must be equally out of your mind if you invest in a typewriter. Huh? Or in a factory that makes typewriters. Or in a company that trains typists. Go on. And it's got nothing to do with the wage level. Don't argue that if the wage is low enough, typists will come back. They won't. The same way here. This technology fundamentally changes the way we do business, the way the economy operates, the way taxes are collected. We need a new regime. National regimes of tax collection is no longer applicable to the 21st century way of doing business. That's just one implication. But for the younger fellows who are sitting here, you got to start thinking about what does national governance means in a business environment of this nature. What does skills training mean? What does the curriculum of universities mean? Etc., etc. Does that make sense? Again, I don't have time to unpack this picture, but that picture is the subject of a discipline that we need to learn. It's a new discipline. Another dimension I alluded to, this is the rate at which the labor share in the economy is falling. If you're wondering why the maldistribution of income is happening, this is not unrelated to the previous technological disruption. And this is not just in underdeveloped countries, this is the so-called developed countries. And therefore it is not surprising that the politics of these countries reflects that. People feeling increasingly systemically marginalized. The economy grows better than before. We've never ever as human beings on the planet created wealth at the rate that we are creating now. And yet, our young entrant in the labor market, they find themselves unable to find jobs, and when they do find jobs, this is what happens over the years to their percentage of the value add that they created. So are you then surprised that European youth think, well, this system is not working for me. I don't care what you call it. Out. I don't know what I'm getting in, but I know what should go out. The same happening in South Africa. Except that we haven't got the right statistical base to show it. This is what unemployment percentage of youth that I mentioned. The world average is around 13%, 14%. That's the world average. In Europe, it's now going above 25%. That is in Europe. In South Africa, some of our communities is above 50%. Again, we can spend a whole day look at what it means in economics, what it means in politics, what does it mean for education system, what it means for training and retraining and so-called career planning. This is the heat map of corruption in the world. The redder it gets, the more we know about it. Doesn't mean that these places don't have it. Very important. I mean, this is supposed to be the cleanest, non-corrupt patch, and here are the Scandinavians that are generally seen as free of corruption. But here, this is sort of Canada, which is relatively clean, but it's a small part of the economy. Don't get fooled by the big patch. Huh? There are only 175 million people. I studied in Canada, I got lots of love for it. But here I'm not talking about nationalistic feeling, I'm talking about scientific reflection of what humanity is saddled with. So that, I think I don't have to explain anything. It says it all. But we do have to do business, live in this environment. And it is a big, big problem. Oops. Just very quickly, I mentioned earlier on the commodity prices at the moment. If the world economy keeps at 2.5%, which is relatively realistic, you're going to get commodity prices. This is, by the way, average price of spot petroleum. It's a new product. Call it oil, food and metal. My colleagues, when they produce this thing, they want to be exactly accurate. But this is not future price. This is not one particular. This is average price of Saudi and North Sea and so on and so forth. But in the next couple of years, we expect some level of stability in commodity prices. For Africa, it's a good thing. It's low, yes, but economics is about where you come from. If you come from these levels, you're actually improving. So Nigeria is not better off, Angola is better off, but Mozambique is not. Because this type of price levels for Mozambique is not good. For Ghana, it's not good. For Angola and Nigeria, it's good. For us, I'll come back to this food, the blue line, although it's been falling, but it's sort of stabilizing, and projections beyond here, for reasons that I'll explain, is that there will be a mild uptick in food prices, which is good for Africa, for the African economy. South African growth is all, as we all know, we don't have to spend time on it, our growth has been hammered down by politics and neglect, incompetence. I'm using diplomatic language. You can be my guest, use whatever language you want. There is a blend of political machination and technical incompetence that has pushed the economy to where it is now. And it's not going to turn around unless we deal with those two issues. It is too important an issue to keep quiet about, all of us. It's a national responsibility, in my view, that business cannot be quiet about it, students cannot be quiet about it, no citizen can be quiet about it. We don't have to be rude about it, we don't have to be violent about it, but we cannot be quiet about it. We've been downgraded, you know, I mentioned that there is one that still keeps us above this red line, which is the investment, sub-investment or above investment. We'll have to see in the next 4 weeks what Moody comes, what judgment they will bring. The impact of this is exchange rate volatility. At the moment, these are the top most volatile currencies. Brazil is number 1, Mexico, Turkey, Russia, Turkey, and South Africa. These are the volatile currencies, and it's not by accident. All 4 of them have got more or less homegrown political problems. The impact is that the currency gets, whenever these lines go up, currency weakens. When currency weakens, a whole lot of things happen within the economy. Most importantly for me, the poor suffer. And that begins with the petrol price, transport, food price, and then it augments as we go along. This is what's happened to government bonds, which is the other side of a downgrade. Borrowing cost goes up. Government borrowing, corporate borrowing, private borrowing in South Africa becomes more expensive. The one that has least flexibility in our situation is government. Corporates stop borrowing, which means they stop investing, which is stop leveraging, etc. Households, to the extent that they can, they scale down, they deleverage. But government cannot. Government is dependent on borrowing to pay pensions, to pay salaries. So when government yield goes up, or interest that they have to pay on the borrowing, these events that happen that are entirely instigated by the cabinet, you see what happens to the borrowing cost of the government. This is the rate at which they can borrow. But government borrowing at the moment is approaching 12% of the entire budget, which already is on an unsustainable path. If we get downgraded by Moody's, that cost is going to go up, and substantially. So my guess is, we're lucky if we don't get downgraded by Moody's, but if we do, the percentage cost of debt service within the budget will go from currently 11.6% or so to around 15%. That means less will be available for everything else. So again, we can spend a whole day on unpacking the consequences of these seemingly midnight decisions. And that's just how reckless and how irresponsible these decisions have become. This is what happened to government borrowing since 2009. And this is what happened to debt to GDP ratio since 1994. We brought it all the way down to 2006, and since then our debt to GDP is rising almost non-stop. Very quickly, what are the opportunities? These are the bad news, are very good news. I thought I'll end it with some good news. This systemic problem that I mentioned is not going to go away in the next 10, 15 years. So we need to learn to live in a system that is characterized by instability and volatility. So there's no point in getting depressed and going on Prozac. We've got to be like professionals, thinking what are within the realms of practical opportunity, not ideological, not in a way theoretical, but practical. And here, if you look at a global comparison, this is the level of spend on economic infrastructure. Africa's, and South Africa included obviously, from Cape to Cairo, unless and until we get the basics of our economies right, we're always going to suffer low growth and extra volatility. So that's one thing indispensable. And very few African countries, there are one or two exceptions, unfortunately smaller ones, but they've set a model that it works. But by and large, we have not dealt with this shortfall in our infrastructure. In South Africa, if we start, our infrastructure, our urban infrastructure is way out of sync with socio-economic needs. Our water is not planned. Our electricity, we're still debating whether we should go nuclear or whether we should go that. Proverbially, the Rome is burning, we're having a Lokhotla. I mean, that is totally irresponsible and intellectually dumb. Because we're not hurting anybody other than ourselves. You should now have a 20-year, a 30-year, a 50-year blend of appropriate energy so that we can tell our youth where they're going, so that businesses can plan, so that investors know, so that as a nation we know. We should have a plan for our water supply. We should have a plan for our urban infrastructure, our ICT, etc., etc., etc. These are, nobody's going to do it for us. Huh? I'm looking at the younger generations because you've got to do it. Neither Chinese will do it, nor the Brits will do it, nor the Americans. And we don't know any civilization on the moon, so the Martians won't do it either. We got to do it ourselves. And this is pretty much the picture and the opportunity. It's a massive opportunity for investment, for job creation, for productive investment, particularly in the urban areas. If we get our policy configuration right, ultimately urban concentration, agglomeration of economics, economies of scale, all of that will mean that both from welfare point of view, from developmental point of view on the one side, and on return on investment, our urban infrastructures have to become globally competitive. It's tragic that none of our metros, none of them, can stand up and say, I've got adequate infrastructure, never mind plan for the next growth pace. And that really reflects from the potholes in Johannesburg, the traffic lights that don't operate in Cape Town, the floods that happen regularly, to the sewage, housing, and. I want to shift very quickly to wrap it up on the food items. Food, Africa, in terms of pure comparative advantage, it's got, as a continent, it's got comparative advantage if we get that right. We have the land as a continent, we have the water as a continent, not all of the members, and we have clean, alternative, renewable energy as a continent. In fact, we have more than what we need. And for the first time, the domestic market of the continent is sufficient enough or large enough to more than justify well above average return on investment in these areas. What we lack, Steve Biko told us, is coordination and commitment to unlocking the capacities. We're fighting too much on the continent about colonial borders. We are not thinking economics and social development. And we need to change that. And it's not going to change by anybody. But for global comparisons, just to show you that from global share of our, where am I going? Yeah. Global share of available land, arable land that is, we have more than comparative advantage. Latin America is second class. So that's an area, call it agriculture, call it food, as well as agro-processing and all the related services. And I'm talking about 21st century services. I'm talking about precision farming. I'm talking about globally competitive production and technologies in this space. We need to play to our strengths. We cannot replicate what the Swiss did or what the Chinese did. We have to create what is our comparative advantage. Again, I mentioned that the market is big enough for the first time in terms of consumer business that is within the continent, so we have the scale to work with. I think I've said everything. These are just my 4 parting messages which I've covered. Economic growth, bearing in mind that growth is going to happen within a new systemic environment. Not the super cycle of growth, not the predictable growth of the past in this relatively volatile environment. Low commodity prices is going to be the norm for a while. Super cycle of commodity prices have been moderated by another possibly 10 to 15 years of relatively normal commodity prices. The South African economy's growth prospects is grim for the reasons that you know better than me, and learning to live with uncertainty is the new trick of the current phase. I think that's my comment. I went as fast as I could.
Iraj, I'm getting the message of business unusual from you, so let me do something unusual quickly. I want to welcome the people here in this building. I was so excited to introduce Iraj, and I only said hello to you, and you responded. But I never said welcome to the business school. So welcome. Are you feeling welcome, people? Thank you very much. So now we are open for questions to Iraj. Any questions, please?
So, given this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world we live in, and the fourth industrial revolution, which is going to decimate production, and this is probably a long answer, so what should a business school like this business school be teaching? What should its curriculum look like? As Einstein said, you can't solve problems with the previous way of doing things.
That's a very good question. I mean, as a moonlighting teacher in universities these days, I do go to different workshops, and that's a question globally at the moment. So universities and particularly graduate schools are saying, well, how do we train the next business leaders? This is not my field, but these are my collection of insights that I've collected in different workshops. One very important element to it is we need to teach adaptability as opposed to expertise. How do you manage in a changing technological, sociological, political environment? Managers need to know how to deal with change, and that's a skill that typically is not taught. The second one is, depending on where the school's focus is, For example, if the course is about managing a medical facility or industrial facility, depending where the tilt of the school is, a great deal of understanding of how technology changes the cost base and what impact it has in terms of its, what the economists would call the multiplier effect or the feeder industries. And a lot of times, management decision is about risk mitigation with respect to geographic risk, political risk, and therefore you have to not just worry about your own operation, you have to also worry about your key inputs. The next element of it is human resource management and development in the context of a changing environment. The Germans have been very successful at it. The French a little bit less, but those two nations have made a lot of success, and there are lessons to be learned. How do we re-skill, upskills as we go along, not when the crisis happens. What you don't do to set up citas and hope that citas will sort out the backlog. That's just wanting to solve today's problem with the old technology. So then you unpack the management or the business decision making from production process to multiplier effect to technology to human resource, and then the new element which comes in this socio-political environment is the societal impact. And there are trade-offs. Yes, you can get it cheaper from China or South Korea or Singapore or Argentina, but what does it do to my license to operate within this environment? And I'm not prepared to pay 10% more to secure and mitigate my risk of license to operate, as opposed to look at the single bottom line of, yes, I can get it better. And that in itself means engagement with the local players, with the community, with the local universities, with local businesses, and so on. So it seems to me that we, as business leaders, we need to think differently, which means business schools need to reflect that in our training.
The lens through which we view the world is important here, because we can view it as doom and gloom, because that's where we all know, and just look on CNN and get most of the first look at the pictures, or we can view it with abundance. And I think that there is a perspective around what I cannot do to change the world versus where I'm sitting right now and what I can do. So maybe in response to the gentleman's question as well, is that our curriculum has to literally look at the ways in which we view the world and the lens through which we do it. So viewing it from an abundance point of view has happened in other economies as well. I'm surprised that you haven't really focused on the tiger economies, for example, in emerging markets in Asia and India and other places like that, that are doing some phenomenal things with their economy despite the doom and gloom. So maybe your response to that. And then the other thing also is that there's a concept of a circular economy that is now pervasive. Maybe not as as large as some of the more materialistic, individualistic type of economies, but what value does that have for Africa?
Yeah, very, very important point. I hope I didn't, in the first half, depress you. My message was that the global system is in the phase of transition from an old segmented to a new one. The old segmented is not going to work, it's dead, like typewriters. The new ones is in evolution, and we as children of twilight, we're trying to learn how it works. We cannot be depressed by it. We need to make it happen. Much like the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century did away with the old regime, and the new regime came up. In that transition, the proletariats emerged, Marxism emerged, socialism emerged as a response to a social phenomenon. We are in that phase. But it's not doom and gloom. There are lots of opportunities, but we need to think with a different worldview, which I think what you're saying. Worldview that says there is a consciousness of humanity this time. There is a consciousness of integration, not separation. There is a consciousness of resources being used differently for different ends and yet productively, not for war and destruction, not for slavery and abuse, etc., etc. Now, if you think the global economy in that way, if I in a sort of imaginary picture, put you in a satellite and ask you to look at Earth down below from up there, and forget about your race, gender, and affiliation. For the moment you are a scientific observer, you will see that there is no shortage of resources. So resource abundance or scarcity is not the real constraint. Although as an economist I can't say that resources are infinite, but resources are not in short supply. Neither capital is in short supply, nor land, nor money. But what we do with that, if you look at the 7 billion creatures who are running around, they've got all the tools, but they're not packaging it properly. They've got all the resources. So the world view is very, very important. And part of this new system that's evolving with the consciousness that is universal, as it may, not for everybody, but then we have to actually think differently. For example, we are conscious internationally, but we operate locally. The circular economy then happens to be that part of think global, act local. This was I was saying in part of my response to the previous question, was the business managers have to look at the circularity of resources in the neighborhood that they live, and it won't work for everything, but it will work for 80 to possibly 85% of the global economy. So my understanding is that the system is in change. It's not doom and gloom, but if you think old problems, you will end up on Prozac, even if you're the president of the United States, because those solutions don't work for today's problems. With respect to the Asian tigers did a phenomenal thing mostly in the 70s, and they established themselves, and since then they've been on a winning wicket. And that is the positive circle of development. But they still haven't solved all their problems. They still got deep social problems. Each one of them differently. They are ahead of a lot of other economies. They're ahead of, in terms of growth, but in terms of some of the embedded social issues of prejudice, of labor rights, of women's rights, they still got to rise up. No less than what the West has to do. Let me also add. So those are my response to those. But in terms of circular economy is a response. It's nothing new for economists. Economists to economics. One circular flow of income is almost the third, fourth lesson that we learn. That notion is always at macro level. Circular economy brings it to the locality, not to the nationality. So that's my understanding of it. I hope I didn't leave some of your question unanswered, but I'm equally happy to learn. Not that I know.
From my point of view, I think we also want to cut it as a money. Because the thing is, infection is you keep the whole situation. It actually be possible if a new party is actually established that's actually aligned with both the needs and the interests of the people. We can actually develop the mindsets of the people. And for example, say, like a hedge fund was to be started to actually boost infrastructure in terms of business and urban, and also attract new types of businesses there and also. And like, okay, if you were the Minister of Finance, for example, if you actually get a new finance started, what would you do in terms of restructuring how the economy, the people space of a country, for example?
The first question, in terms of realignment, we just saw an example of it live 2 days ago in France. People actually realigned. They said, we don't want socialists, we don't want communists, we don't want this. In fact, Mr. Macron got no party because he managed to realign the society. And my submission is that that's pretty much what happened in the United States too. Now, whether you realign it French style or American style or other style, I don't know. We're learning. Nobody knows. But one thing that we do know is that there is a need for realignment because the old structures don't work anymore. The society is not going to be excited by having a red flag with a hammer on it. That's not a job opportunity in the 21st century. Or to have a nationalistic flag with a symbol of whatever your nation is. So you need to realign in a 21st century. How it will happen, I don't know. Two nations have shown us two variations. I have no doubt that 12, 15 more variations will emerge, and eventually as human beings we will learn how to do it. With respect to what I would do, I would certainly come out and say, guys, I don't know. That would be my first line of honest sharing with the nation, and say, look, I don't know, you're in the same boat. You guys are into agriculture, I want you to tell me what should be done. But there are rules here, not the old rules. I don't want agriculture the old way that you treated your workers and you paid or didn't pay with the wine or with whiskey. That's not what I mean. I also don't want to use the old one, what technology you use. I want 21st century because I want to take the country, not now, in the next 30 years, in your sector that you're a specialist. I don't know nothing. I would do the same thing with the manufacturing. I would do the same thing with mining. I would not pretend that I know, nor would I pretend or assume that if I get an academic advisor, he or she will know. And as semi-academic, I can tell you. But I won't exclude them. They have a role to play. They have a role of contesting concepts. But they don't know trends in technology and in production. So I'll take it from there. I will open it up. I would have no secret meetings with anybody. And in that way, I'll bring the nation into the process, because it's not my business, it's not my life, it's your life, it's their lives, it's their taxes, it's their future, it's their careers. So to the extent that we can create in the 21st century a type of democracy that is inclusive, open and accountable, then what I'll see my role is to mediate in terms of never-ending engagement. At some point I'll say, okay, I've heard all these things, these are the 5 options, and I'll say, guys, we're going to go that route. Then I'll put my foot down and say, okay, let's monitor it and do it.
Thanks. Dr. Iraj, what's your view on, I'm currently looking at the political landscape here in South Africa, and there's this contentious issue that's currently occurring, this radical economic transformation. What's your view about that? And secondly, what's your view in terms of how would we actually implement diplomatically the effectiveness of having those attributes that could assist in terms of having the radical economic transformation implemented effectively in South Africa?
Look, we must avoid the fact that radical economic transformation, if it means what it says, is a necessity for our country. It's also a necessity for the United States. It's also a necessity for any other society that you choose. If radical means get to the root causes of changing the economy. Now, we have our own historic problems. We can't just ignore it. Whether you call it radical or whether you call it whatever structural, be my guest. But as a business, as a citizen, we cannot ignore that 45% of our households do not have sufficient subsistence level earning. I would submit, and here I may get attacked by my guests here, by my host, I would submit that 80% of our graduates from all universities do not have the appropriate skills to cope with the economies that's out there. That's an indictment on our system. That's part of this radical economic transformation. I would submit that the pay between the executives and the workers is out of line. The same way that the pay between the ministers and the rest is way out of line. Right? I would say that these are radical economic transformation. The overhead of the government is way out of line with its operational budget. Why do we need so many ministers, deputy ministers? Why every minister needs so many drivers, bag carriers, free tickets? They just go and they do a job. And worldwide, you have now a trend emerging, be it in India, a developing country, or be it in Sweden, a developed country, where the ministers are treated like a job. You've been given a job, you have your apartment, keep your apartment. You want to have a Toyota, drive a Toyota. You want to have a bicycle, go on a bicycle. You want to come on a motorcycle, be my guest. You need to get real. This colonial approach to resource use, which is you're a president, you're a mayor, you're a MEC, MLC, whatever you call yourself, these are colonial terms. Decolonization of mind must begin with our mind, an approach to the economy. If you want to transform the economy without decolonizing your mind, forget it. You're going to create you're using old solutions for the new problems. So the chief executives have got to change, so should the president, so should the minister. A minister that needs bodyguard is not fit to be a minister. Because he's using resources that belongs to the poor to do what? To have bodyguards. But that is the money that should have gone to a better school. Is it not? That's where the radical transformation should begin. We cannot superimpose a terminology on an old structure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's where we need to engage. It's a university here. We've got to be open to ideas. We cannot deny the need for radical transformation. But we need to, in an intellectual environment, we need to define the substance of what radical means and where should it begin and how deep and how wide it should go. If you want to use it as a slogan to create more tensions, be my guest. If you don't believe how it works, watch Trump. It's so easy to do. But will that solve the problem of 1%, 99% in the United States? Forget it. That's where my thinking is. I love radical economic transformation, but I like to start with those who spell it out.
Yeah.
Not to say and prescribe you should do as I say. It should be you do as I do. The day that the cabinet, whoever is sitting in it, to come and ban abuse of office, abuse of fiscal resources, and show me that they are riding the same car that you and I ride, in the same traffic that you and I are subjected to do, the same potholes that we do, then I say they've arrived. Then I like that radical transformation. Yeah. The same applies to any church leader or religious leader, the business leaders. They sit in these business forums. None of them has agreed that we're going to normalize the pay. So let's not just focus on the politicians alone, because it's such a sexy thing to do. The reality is that our society, radical economic transformation means rethink your worldview, think limited resources, and the massive backlogs that you and I have to deal with. Then radicalize it. But radicalize does not mean destroy. It means make it more productive, more humane, more ethical, more sustainable. That's my understanding of radical economic transformation need. I'll stop here, I can get carried away.
There are three people, just three, I'm going to allow, there are two ends here, one there, those two, and then you start first, and then these two guys here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abedian. My contribution is I'm going to make a comment, a short comment, and then a question. My comment is on Ethiopia, and I especially like the points you mentioned about Ethiopia. I personally have worked in Ethiopia, and I've seen the transformation that is happening and that has happened. And some of the things, I worked in Ethiopia between 2010 and 2015 with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And you can see here a government that is open to business, a government that is open to advice. I would sit, for example, in meetings with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation experts from Seattle, Washington, D.C., and everything that the Gates Foundation recommends to them, the Ethiopians ask 3 questions. Can we deliver? Can we partner? Can we scale? And I saw the ease with which, as a project manager and with the Gates Foundation team, you can see a government minister just like this. And they just ask, show us how. And you can see, for example, they have made massive investments in agricultural transformation. In fact, the government poached ex-Gates Foundation officer to come back to Addis Ababa to head the government agricultural transformation agency. It has now become the biggest transformation in agriculture. Ethiopia has made massive transformation in infrastructure development. They've just built the 2-line electric line from Ethiopia to Djibouti. Ethiopia is a landlocked country, but they have one of the highest marine fleets in the continent. Ethiopia has intercity tram system, which is not anywhere in the continent, not even in South Africa, not even in Southern Africa. They are the only country that have. And this just shows that if we have a government that is focused, that is disciplined, that is less corrupt. I was in Ethiopia when the president died, the former president Zenawi. This man, after being in power for more than like 15 or 20 years, he didn't own any hidden money in a Swiss account. He only had 1 wife, 4 children, and a family.
That's an aberration.
Yes, okay. But that's just how it is. He was that simple. And he opened the country for business and for talks. And Bill Gates received his honorary degree last year from Addis Ababa University. As we are speaking now, Bill Gates is in Ethiopia launching a project of maternal health and transformation in health. And really this shows that government alone cannot deliver things. Yeah. Government needs advice, and government must be open for advice and receive that advice and work with multiple sectors to actually transform the country. I've worked in Rwanda. I've seen also, for example, how the government is open for business and really in driving projects. And I think we need to see this kind of openness and government and business talking together in South Africa. At the moment, it's like the business is talking at government. And the business also reached a point where when they saw the government that came in power, they were repulsed by it, and they stepped back, and they left a vacuum. And of course, we know who occupied that vacuum. It isn't a pleasant one. So how can we reach a point where actually real business in South Africa comes to occupy that space that they need to occupy to actually work with the government? And then my last point on Ethiopia is Ethiopian Airlines makes profits every year. There is no other airline, in fact, all the airlines combined in the continent don't make as much profit that Ethiopian Airlines make. It is run by an Ethiopian, and I think we need to actually cultivate these skills that actually in the continent things can be done. General Electric was doing a roadshow this week from Cairo to Cape Town. Actually, they had a symposium in Cape Town looking at massive projects that are going on in the continent. My question to you is, how can we bring about interconnectedness in the continent, especially when it comes to infrastructure development and massive movement in trade and technology diffusion? We just saw yesterday Safaricom, for example, released their results. It's a 10 billion rand company. It makes all the profits of all the 4 major banks combined, one telecom company. When Vodacom brought M-Pesa here, it died. It died even before it started. And how can we, for example, as an African continent, take a technology that is working in one place and diffuse it in another place? We are actually not seeing that interconnectedness. How do we bring it about?
Okay, we take the three questions all together and then respond, Iraj. Where are the two guys here? Okay. Briefly, people, we are running out of time.
Okay. Thank you very much, Doctor. I just wanted to find out, I'm a bit confused as to whether I should continue with my question or not, because you said you want to seize the subject of radical economic transformation. But my basic interest, especially the reason as to why I came, was to find out exactly why do you say it would be destructive. And my second question is also based on when you mentioned that a lot of businesses which are doing extremely good today will go down in the next 5 years. And I'm noticing that a lot of young people are interested in Uber. Do you also anticipate the same thing will happen 5 years down the line? Thanks.
The last question, people.
No, thank you. I've said a lot of things. I just want to comment on one or two. I think I will agree with you on education and the 80% part. Partly because I was part of Christmas Fall, and that was the sentiment we were sharing, that the current education is not preparing us for the world that is out there. We are just cooked, steamed, and then thrown there. Then when you get into the world, you are not properly prepared. That's point number one. Point number two, we talk about obsolete ideas which we are trying to implement. And there is this narrative that for an economy to develop, and I want to use the word specifically develop because growth for me is totally different. For the economy to develop, it must be led by the corporate, business particularly, and so on. Don't you think that idea is obsolete? Because in my view, people who go to business, they go to business to make money, not to develop the society. And what has become clear is that what is called now corporate something, social investment, it's merely crumbs that are just falling off from the big table to the poor. And the amount of money that they take away. And look at how, for instance, just to reference one point, how farming has been killed in South Africa because big corporates such as Shoprite, Speak and Pay, they are taking from the entire value of a product, like whatever product it may be. They are getting the most, and then the farmers are getting the least. And when it is time to pay the workers, they can't pay the workers. Particularly on the question of land reform, it becomes difficult because you are given land, but you're not given the market to sell your product to. And the person that you are going to sell your products to is paying you the least most. That is a result of government now moving away from farming and giving it to the big businesses to lead it. Don't you think in the context of South Africa, for us to develop and to actually deal with poverty, it becomes important that in strategic issues, government should be involved. Thank you.
I'm going to do a reverse order, simply because I remember. In terms of, I don't know the code language that you use, government should be involved. If you mean government should now become farmers and support farmers and so on, or do you mean the government should regulate the land redistribution, provision of technical services, and the market structure to which the emerging and existing farmers should sit? If you mean the latter, I'm with you. If you mean that government now must decide whose cousin should get which piece of land and which money should, then we're parting ways. So I'm very conscious, and I repeat, without radical change in these operational relationships between factors of production, technology, and the market, we're not going to deal with our problems. So that's where I stand on it. In terms of everybody goes to business to make profit, that's the old style. Be my guest if you want to do that way. But it's not going to work in the 21st century. Society is going to rebel against you, community is going to rebel against you, political forces are going to rebel against you, intellectuals are going to rebel. Profit is a necessity for doing business. Let's be absolutely clear. The same way that getting a degree is a requirement a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition for being a good graduate. But you need to have a degree. Profit, if it's not there, business is not sustainable. How you make the profit, on what terms and what baggage you leave behind after you made profit is important. And that's what new businesses is about. This new circular economy, as I understand it, is about that. The multiplier effect is exactly that. To say that if I'm a retailer and I squeeze my supply chain too much, yes, my profit in the short term is higher, but my sustainability in a circular flow of income is diminished. So that would be my thinking. So the government has a role to play, but that role should be regulatory in order to bring about social justice in the medium term, but not once off, over time. With respect to the question of why do I think it can be destructive, if you do not change the structural relationships in the productive processes and you superimpose on it a slogan, it creates tension. It does not change the relationship. A good example, we had a BEE legislation. It was necessary back in 1990s. What did it do? Did it change the relationships? Did it create wealth for some blacks? Absolutely. Was it a necessary thing to do black economic empowerment? Absolutely. Did we do it the right way? No. Because we did not pay attention to or drill down to where skills are built, where economic power is changed, where sustainability is done. So I'm not in favor of any slogan, right, left, center. I'm in favor of any good policy should have 3 or 4 substructures. One, it should be clear what it is that we're doing and what we're not doing. Secondly, what's the timeline for it? Thirdly, what's the structural operational requirements? Transformation is a business, it's an important business, right? Anybody who is business doesn't say, well, I'm going to start this business. What do they say? They say, well, this is the amount of capital, this is who am I going to hire, this is my timeline, this is where I'm going, and this is where I'm not going. Even with all of that, some of them fail. But at least they got the business structure right. That's what I mean. You tell me economic transformation, whether it's radical or not, I can't get excited. But if you tell me what it is that you want to do, over what period of time, what outcome you want to have, who is going to do it, within what structure or within what organization, then I start paying attention. At the moment, in none of the documents that I've read, speeches that I've talked, even unanimity on what it is that we call radical economic transformation. The ANC policy document has 1 paragraph in it, defines it differently. Our new Minister of Finance defines it differently. A couple of other ministers say different things. And behold the confusion. So I'm absolutely, based on my experience and my conviction, no slogan is going to mean anything if we do not define the substance. Therefore, it will create more tension. It will create expectation on the part of the poor, on settlement on the part of the rich. Investors will sit and do nothing because they don't know what it means. You'll get confusion. And we have enough of it. We have inherited enough of it. We must think 21st century and deal with our problems. If I go to my last point in terms of what do we do, I wish I knew, ma'am. I wish I knew, and in my little nick of the wood, I believe in the 21st century, the more we know about it, the more likely that our youth, the older ones, they all know, including myself, is the old solutions. We worry about the new problems, but our mindset is old ways. And let me give you an example. I know we have time. In older families, those who are in my generation, a little bit less, a little bit more, have this problem. I go and get a new cell phone, right? I come home. I don't dare switching it on. I need to read the manual. I need to think which press button and so on. I spend a day or two to read this thing, to work out what I should and shouldn't do. I haven't switched it on yet. This is how we were brought up. I give it to my daughter, start switching it on, and he's already worked it out. It's intuitive. right? It's a different mindset. One is structured, don't be intuitive, don't try things, because we come from age of technology, you press the thing blows up and all those savings blow. The new generation are born with a level of consciousness, intuitive, that says, yeah, we know this is more or less right, so press this thing, and when you don't go to help function and all that stuff. I was never told. Well, my help function was a manual, 55 pages, and until you have finished, you don't press anything. Right? That is what, there is a generational gap at the moment on the continent. Those who are in power, they've been brought up with a particular manual, particular way of doing things. Then there is a 65% of our population on the planet on the continent are youth. They actually think differently. They operate differently. Whether they are in the ghettos of Accra or Ethiopia or Kenya or South Africa, they have one thing in common. They don't read manuals. And they all have this intuitive thing of what is right and what is wrong, what is fair, what is not fair, what is just, and so on. And they don't really care about, if you are older, you deserve respect. We have in our families too. It's nothing but Africa. Europeans have got more of it. Huh? So we are in that generational gap. Africa's my solution, again, I'm time conscious. On the continent, the youth must lead. The elders will complain and be grumpy and will be destructive. But unless the youth arise, and with the power of their intuition, with the force of their consciousness, rise above the obstacles, we're going to have the old guys who want to have respect and don't ask me questions. I can use resources what I want because I am in charge and you must accept it. That would be my shortest answer I could give.
Yeah, let me stop there. Paul, Prof. Faisal is going to do the thanks for us. Paul?
Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate you.
Good morning, everyone. My job is very quick. I've got 3 big thank yous to say. Firstly, of course, thank you very much, Iraj. Thank you so much for your presentation. As always, most informative. Just a small bit. I have the good privilege of having attended all of your presentations since 2013. And I think in our conversation this morning, we pointed out that this would probably be the most difficult one of the lot. It's been interesting to see how the landscape has changed. But thank you very much for sharing those insights. As usual, very informative. I was looking at descriptive words and I thought honest, realistic, and very sober. Thank you very much. The second point is, of course, thank you very much to our stakeholders. Thank you very much from everybody from industry who joined us today. Also, thank you to our colleagues from the rest of the university. I also want to use this opportunity to plug perhaps just one of the items. If you remember, one of the structural factors said ethical leadership. Please watch this space. We've got a leadership summit coming up towards the end of June, and the topic of that issue is ethical leadership within a socio-political environment. So please have a look at that. And then lastly but not least, our relationship office, Ms. Colleen Jooster, back there in her team, Bronwyn Philander and JP, thank you very much. Without their input, I don't think this would have happened. Thank you so much.